My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with Major Rachelle Jenkins in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. How you doing today?
Good.
Good.
How about yourself?
I'm fine, thank you. Let me back up, since we haven't done a pre-interview with you. When is your birthday?
July.
You want to tell me the year?
Do you know how many people have asked me how old I am today?
What year were you born?
53.
I was born 46.
It's different. You're a man.
What day in July?
17.
17. And where were you born?
Washington, D.C.
Washington,
District
D.C.
of Columbia.
Okay. When did you come to Oklahoma?
When I left active duty in June of '92, I actually arrived here the 2nd of July.
Why Oklahoma?
Well, I'm a pragmatic person. I grew up in California and knew I could not afford to live in California, but my family is still there. My kids were living in Georgia, and my daughter is still there, my grandbaby. And Oklahoma's the middle of the country. I had been here many times. I liked the values. The people were friendly. The countryside was beautiful, and the cost of living was affordable.
Okay. Why did you join the Army Reserve?
I was in the IRR, and they decided they were going to promote me. And I thought, well, promotion isn't any good unless I have a unit. So I interviewed with several units, and this one intrigued me. And they also offered me a job, so I said, well, let's do it. And they told me during the interview that we might be going to Bosnia, and I thought that was just initiation, you know. I mean, because really that's the whole purpose of the Army, is to go to crisis areas. So I said, oh, that's not a problem. And then when I got my orders, I just was like, okay, okay.
So you're a signal officer.
I'm a signal officer.
Were you signal or active duty?
I was signal on active duty.
How long were you on active duty?
I have almost 5 years enlisted in the medical. Then I had 2 years as SMP and ROTC. That was simultaneous military professional with a medical unit. I was branched signal when I got my commission, and I spent almost 8 years active duty signal officer.
Why did you join the Army over the Navy or Marines?
Well, I called them all up and talked to them. At that time, my hair was down to my shoulders, and thought the Navy was the best. Navy, I wanted to get on ship, and they had just opened ship up to women. This was in 1978. And they said, well, we can't guarantee that we can put you on a ship because we have so many women that are senior to you. And yes, you'll have to get your hair cut. And the Air Force said, well, you don't have to get your hair cut, but you have to tie it up. But he just didn't have time to talk to me. I called the Army, and they said, come on down. And they looked at my high school transcripts, and they looked at my ASVAB tests, and they say, you can have anything you want. What do you want? So I said, well, I want something in the medical field. I want to go to Germany. And I got it, you know, and I was just, you know, and every time I got disgruntled with the Army and went looking in other places, the Army would say, what do you want? And I'd tell them what I want, and they'd give it to me. So I was always really happy with the Army. I think it's, I've grown, I've matured a lot.
Before you joined this unit, were you aware of civil affairs?
No, not even.
What was your first inkling of what civil affairs when you joined the unit? What did you think of civil affairs?
I absolutely had no idea. I took the correspondence course right away. I signed up for it and took it. It was real vague about what they were doing. However, I do volunteer work with the Red Cross, and I was on the disaster assistance team, and of course the military Red Cross messaging team. And I had taken a number of classes there, and I said, well, this is just like the Red Cross, only, you know, I mean, as far as humanitarian help and getting in there, and that's what it looked like, only with a military, you know, flavor and funding and all that. So I thought, well, they both were compatible, and that's kind of the direction I thought I wanted to go with my future.
Okay, so you joined the unit, and you got ordered for Bosnia. What was your reaction?
Well, I really wasn't sure it was going to happen until I got my orders, but my baby brother got married and I went home. I wanted to tell my family face to face, so I did. I told them, I said, I think I'm going to Bosnia. And I mean, their hearts just went out because all the years I'd been in the military, I was gone. I was never home. I was not there for birthdays or funerals or, anything. And since I've been, a civilian, I have been home 3-4 times a year for major events, and they've liked having me around. So they just all kind of panicked a little bit, and I tried to, said, well, the good Lord kept me out of, for some reason, kept me out of Grenada, kept me out of Just Cause, and kept me out of the Persian Gulf. Said, so if I'm going, there's a reason I'm going, and everything will be okay.
So, what's the date that you left Broken Arrow? Or Tulsa?
24th of November, 1996.
And you traveled to where?
Fort Bragg.
Tell me about Fort Bragg.
It was, well, I like Fort Bragg. I learned that I snore. As one of the gals took a video camera. I have lived in a barrack situation before, so it was, it was a good time for bonding with there were 3 of us from our unit that went, and a couple other gals from another unit that we ended up being working in close proximity with over there. So that was a good time for bonding, getting to know personalities, and the training. Some of it was really good. The mount training was really good. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Some of it really wasn't necessary. Stuff we had already done here because we'd hurried up to do it. But it was short. It was just military to me because I had spent so many years on active duty. It was not a shock to me.
And you stayed at Fort Bragg how long?
Let's see. We left there, I think it was the 6th of December. So that's 10 days, 14 days.
When you were getting on the airplane to go to Bosnia, what was your reaction?
Well, the airplane we got on was a commercial plane. But I really, just before we got on it, I was sure that Mr. K-Pop was going to say, well, you passed your RTEPs, you can go home now. That we really weren't going to be going to Bosnia. But I think that's the way I just was able to maintain a good attitude the whole time because, yeah, I was a little scared. I didn't know what I was going into. It was really difficult to get any news on Bosnia except for negative stuff. And we did get some text handed to us, but it was just, generic area studies, not real in-depth. So it was an adventure.
So from Fort Bragg, where'd you go? Polk Air Force Base.
Right. We had a whirlwind tour. We had to touch down in Bermuda for fuel, and we were there for about an hour, and we got to stand out on the flight line and look around, take pictures and stuff. Then we went to let's see, it was the Azores, and we touched down there and got to go get a cup of coffee. It was by then it was like 3 in the morning. And then we touched down again in Aviano and ended up getting stuck because of the snows came in to Hungary, and we couldn't fly into Hungary. So we got stuck for a day in Aviano, Italy. So that was pretty nice. And then when we got to Hungary, it was tent city. Really built up mobilization site, obviously tactical. Real Army stuff. I've been on many exercises of that magnitude, but not for 6 months, only for about 45 days.
So what'd you do in Hungary?
Nothing. We drew rounds, and we got on the plane and flew to Bosnia, pretty much. That was it. Spent one night there and picked up whatever we needed from the PX that we hadn't thought about or whatever, and drew our ammunition and left. Got our ID cards. No, we didn't get our ID cards. We got those in Bosnia.
So whenever you were flying towards Bosnia and you're landing, what's your reaction?
Well, I just kept watching out the window to try and get, but there was a low cloud cover, and you really couldn't see anything, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to land because of this. That's how it is in the winter, and we arrived in December. But I kept looking out the window for glimpses, of what I was going into, because I really, felt like I really didn't have a good concept of what I was going into.
So you land, what happened?
That was scary. We landed, and we're in I think it's a C-141, and the air crew they lower the back, and the air crew says, come on, grab your stuff, come on, let's go. So here we've got a weapon, we've got our helmet on, we've got a flak vest on, we've got to grab a ruck and a duffel bag, and he wants us running off the airfield. And I thought, good Lord, what is going on around here? I mean, it's snow everywhere, but he had such a sense of urgency. It reminded me of stories I've read of Vietnam. You got to get off the aircraft so they can get out of there before it gets blown up. And I kept listening for rounds or something. So that was my first picture, and I thought, what is going on here? Everybody's wearing a helmet, flak vest, and carrying a weapon. So I assumed there was some real danger there. While we were there, though, there wasn't any. But it took a couple weeks to assess the situation and find out that to be true. There was a constant low fog, and you could not see 15 meters on each side of the road. When it finally lifted sometime in the middle of February, I saw like Muslim army bases that were 50 meters off the road. And I didn't even know they were there. And all this time we've been driving along, trying to use good tactical maneuver and movement and convoy control, but you can't see. So you had no idea it was there. Those guys always knew they were there. I was like, oh man, this could have been really hairy, if something was going on, because you're not supposed to leave the hard stand because of mines, though there aren't a lot of mines.
They say hard stand.
The asphalt or the blacktop. Because of mines, there were not a lot of mines in that area because it was such a heavily populated area. But, it was a good rule of thumb just to stay on the road.
How long did you stay in Tuesday?
I stayed in Tula. So I was there for 6.5 months.
Okay. Where were your quarters?
I was at the Blue Factory, which is the U.S. military.
The what factory?
Blue Factory.
Blue Factory.
It's called the Blue Factory, blue color. And it's a big blue building that used to be a trucking company. And the Norwegians took it over during the war and turned it into a hospital, and the Americans had acquired it 3 months, I think, before we got there. And it was now the American Military Hospital in Bosnia. And first we lived in tents, but though the hospital was in the building, and they had some of the expando vans, and they had pretty good facilities for a combat support hospital. And then late February, early March, we moved into what I call boxes. They were 20 by 12 two-man rooms, one window, and it had a heater in there. And you could put 2 cots up, and they built us some little shelf things for, so we could organize our underwear and stuff, and our uniforms. So it was certainly nicer than the tents, because the tents weren't heated. You had to turn the kerosene heaters off at night, and you wake up, and I was always first one up lighting the kerosene.
What's the temperature up there?
Actually, it wasn't too bad this winter. There were a couple of short cold snaps, but it probably stayed right around upper 20s. It actually was no colder than some of the Oklahoma winters we've had, and we don't have severe winters here. It was actually beautiful because there's no wind. the snow came straight down. You could just stand there and watch it just coming straight down. It was so neat. The rain was the same way. And there's a Muslim, I guess they call them a mosque, just across the road from where the billeting area was. And I get up, because we had a gym, a tent, with a gym, right outside the female barracks tent. So I would get up at 5:30 to go there, and the cantor was singing the prayers in the morning, and it was, it was such a unique sound to me, and I could almost visualize, being in the Middle East somewhere and walking through the marketplace and hearing this cantor singing out the prayers. It was.
Was it a cantor or a reporter?
I think it was a real person, but I don't know. It was, yeah, it was neat.
Okay. Do you have any contact with the local people?
Oh yeah, all the time.
What was their reaction to you being a woman in the U.S. military?
Well, the deputy mayor had been a major and a brigade XO during the war, and he said, "Well, a major is a pretty high position for a woman." I said, "Yes, it is." I mean, if he had a problem with it, I don't notice if people have a problem with my rank or not. I figure if I've got the job to do, I'm going to do it, and if they've got a problem with it, they just need to stay out of the way. But we worked real well together. I explained I had a lot of respect for the position he held now, and also the one he had held during the war. And of course, I had to do that through translators. Hopefully, it was translated appropriately, and I'm sure it was. I had a lot of faith in my translators.
Who were your translators?
Oh my. Well, I ended up with 8 in the end. We started out with 6. My lead translator was a physician during the war. He's Serbian, but he's Serb, but he lives in Tuzla. So Tuzla is his home, and his wife is Muslim. So he fought on the Tuzla side, on the Muslim side, as a doctor, and he had to walk home every night, he said, during the war, like 18 clicks when he had his furlough, because they'd stay out for 7 to 10 days, and then they'd go home for furlough. And he had to walk home at night, 18 kilometers to get home. But it's kind of strange when you think the war's only 18 kilometers from you. I don't know how you can stay home for 10 days, But then I had, he made more as a translator, that's why he was translating. Doctors only make about 300 D-marks a month over there. I had a gal who was a teacher. I had a guy who had been an ambulance driver. I had another gal that the war started when she was just finishing high school, so she had no technical skills, but she had a fluent use of English and German, so those were pretty good skills. One guy who was a construction guy, so he was very knowledgeable when we went around talking about reconstructing some of the buildings. And one guy who was an electrician. So, and the last gal that we got had worked with the International Medical Corps as their receptionist, and so she was very familiar with the medical humanitarian organizations, and she was great. So all of them were excellent. I had no complaints about any of them.
What were your duties every day, your average day?
Well, we usually convoyed every day except for Sunday. I didn't want to convoy on Sundays. I wanted to let my soldiers have time to get their stuff cleaned up and get organized. We would convoy out 8 to 9, somewhere around there. Sometimes locally, sometimes long distance. In the beginning, when it was a requirement, force protection requirement for 4 vehicles, we worked with the other team over at Guardian. We were at Blue Factory and Guardian were right like within half a mile of each other. So they would provide 2 vehicles and we would provide 2 vehicles, and then we could go out and we'd split the day, or we'd decide if one of us had a mission that took them a long ways away, we'd just do their mission that day, and then the next day we'd do the other team's mission, because you had to have all those vehicles, and I didn't feel I could take medical people to support my convoy when they had a real life mission too, because we were seeing, the hospital was seeing not only sick call, but they were also seeing local nationals that worked for the U.S. Army. They were seeing people who showed up at the gate that had some serious injuries or illnesses. Their workload was just tremendous, and I just didn't feel, unless it was an emergency, that I could go to the colonel and say, I need 4 bodies and 2 vehicles. So I didn't do that very often, but the few times I did go to her, I got them. I got what I needed.
What was your job title over
I was the S5 for the medical battalion.
there? Did you work in the hospital?
I worked as their advisor for civil affairs. If they got a civilian patient in, they would talk to me. They would tell me either it was something they had to work on right away, they had to operate right away, or they'd say, okay, this person's stable, here's what they've got, where do you want to take them, kind of stuff. Or if I just saw a civilian, I'd ask, who's that, why are they here? And then I advise them legally of their limitations, because, you know, if they make a decision after I've advised them that's clearly what they want to do as a doctor versus what State Department or the Defense Department wants them to do, they have to answer to that. I just have to advise them then. So they were really good about working with me. There were some things that they went ahead and worked on. I would never, you know, told them, I don't tell you how to practice medicine. You know if the patient's an emergency, life or death, you got to do it now, or they can wait, or we can send them someplace else. So, but when you figure that out, I need to know what you figured out.
Was the hospital marked as a target of exclusion in any way?
It had the big red cross on it, you know, that you could see from an aerial point of view, you could see it for miles around. Everybody knew the hospital was there. Unfortunately, one of the tactics of the war was to take out the hospitals first, which is why their healthcare system was in such bad shape. The buildings were destroyed pretty badly. I visited a lot of the local clinics to try and get some State Department funding for renovating them. These are places that not only take care of a normal local population of maybe 8,000 people, but now you add refugee populations, people that have been displaced that are there. And it's usually a doctor, a nurse, and a housekeeper, and they do minimal primary care. I mean, not even a little more than first aid, actually. You know, they do immunizations for students when it's time. They do it all at one time in a cycle. They'll set broken bones if it's something simple. Otherwise, they just kind of stabilize a patient a little bit and throw them in a private vehicle because they have no ambulances and send them to the health center downtown or the hospital. So, but they're very important because they're the people, the local people, do not know basic first aid. Not like our people do. We learn it in Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Red Cross teaches it. You see it on the TV. Those people do not know basic first aid. Scary. So something simple can turn into a fatality on the car ride to the hospital because the roads are so bad. You know, what if you, you know, normally we live from back injuries. They would die because they'd be riding around on these bumpy, potted roads or bleeding and they don't know how to wrap it, you know, to stop it if it's an arterial bleed. Or somebody stops breathing, they just throw them in the car rather than trying to resuscitate them because they don't know how to do that. So they lose people that way, and it's just a matter of they haven't been, you know, they haven't trained their society. And we looked at trying to set up a program. There was such a short time, 6.5 months is a very short time, to identify problems and gather information on what you can do, what kind of possible solutions there are, and then initiate. And it's a big job. For one team, we were responsible for all of the American sector, and we were also invited into other sectors to advise medically on what was going on. which meant not just interfacing with the humanitarian organizations that were in our area, but the ones that were in other areas too. We had to know what they were offering. We could find needs. I mean, there's millions of needs, but we had to find who had something that could fill that need, because there's billions of dollars of humanitarian aid coming in over there. And so by having meetings and meeting with these humanitarian organizations, you could find the medical ones and then find out what they can do. So when you found a need, you can match them up, and that was our job, trying to match those needs the best we could.
The children.
Yeah.
California.
They're children, you know. All children are just, they're just neat. You'd see them on the streets, and when we would, every once in a while, we'd do a PSYOPs mission, just handing out magazines and newsletters, which was really good for our soldiers. They loved getting out there around the public. The people were always happy to see them. They'd take their newspapers or whatever they were handing out. But the kids would come up. There were 2 soldiers I worked with, young ladies, and these kids were like following the Pied Piper. I mean, and they didn't. These soldiers didn't speak Bosnian, but they talked to them. And of course, the kids knew a little bit English. They talked to them just like they were talking to their own kids, you know, like they were a mom in them. And these kids just loved it. It was, it was incredible to watch. And somebody had mentioned, one of the doctors had mentioned that if there were any orphans around, he would be interested in trying to adopt. So I started pursuing that enough to where we had an orphanage of children 0 to 5 that we would go see once a week and spend maybe 2 hours. They don't get candy, so we take little candies for them, and we play with them and hug them, and we had a real relationship going, so much that the colonel at the hospital said, well, let's just do a carnival day here. And we got all cleared for clearances to let them in, and they set up little booths with games for them to play and win prizes. And the G4 at Division said that they could eat in the dining facility, so we fed them. It's probably more food. I mean, these kids were, more food of different kinds than they have ever had. And so whenever we would drive in, like one time we drove in just to show it to the new team, but we couldn't stay. And all the little kids were out playing in the yard. They all sat down and they were like, they're just so excited. And the director said, oh, they knew you were coming. They said, they're here. But it was great. And I got to hold a 17-day-old baby when I went there, because these are not all victims of the war while it was going on, but the consequences of war. And a month-old baby. But they had kids, of course, the 1.5-year-olds that are getting into everything, and that was fun too. But kids are kids. The refugee camps, those kids were out of control. I didn't like going into big refugee camps, because as soon as they saw our green vehicles, they just surround us. They'd start hanging on to it and run alongside of it, and I was so afraid, some kid would slip and fall under the tires or something, just what we needed. And this happened in the winter too, and that really scared me, because how do you get those kids to stay backed off? They were just out of control. And anybody who's living in those kind of crowded conditions that they were, and who's your parent anymore, or maybe they didn't have a parent because they have 25 people crammed into a single apartment, about 1,000 square foot apartment. That's not very big for that many people. 1 bathroom, 1 shower, and at least 30% of them are children. So.
How many kids were in the orphanage?
The one that we supported was 34 children. There was a bigger orphanage across the street, and it was children from 5 to 18, and there was 186 there. Now each major each municipality had an orphanage. This was the Tuzla Municipality Orphanage. Tuzla has a population, the municipality, of about 250,000 people. So that gave you about 1% in orphans.
Describe Tuesday.
Oh, wow. It's like a big town, a lot of high-rise buildings, very European. Reminds me of Germany. I lived in Germany for 5 years. But in the spring, the hillsides were covered with all these little garden patches. And I asked my translator about that, and he said, well, during the war they couldn't get any food in. So the decision was made, if you can work a plot of land, go get yourself a plot of land and work it so you don't starve to death. So people have continued that because the economy is still pretty bad. There are not enough jobs. So people continue to grow their own crops. And it's just, it's a hilly area, and it's pretty neat to see all these little patchwork gardens all along the hillside. But historically, Tuzla means Salt City, and they have mined salt in that city for 6,000 years. We went to the salt factory to inquire about how they could start IV production, because there are no IV. The only IV fluids in Bosnia are humanitarian aid, and that was getting ready to be cut off. And I knew we needed to find a solution. And I thought that was the best option, and that is continuing to be pursued now, even while we're back. So they had a salt museum with all the old tools. They used to just drop a big old bucket down underground in the center of downtown and drop salt. Well, because they've been mining salt for so many years, from 1953 to the present, downtown has sunk 18 meters, which is about 40 feet. And so they have buildings that start to crumble and the foundations shift and everything because they're taking the salt lake out from under the city and the ground has to go down. So a solution to that, the mayor, who's a remarkable guy, has found another salt lake, which is only about 15 clicks outside the city in a rural area, not built up. And he's going to close the mine, but not the factory, and mine it from out there so he can stop the destruction of the city. Because it's a pretty neat city. A lot of historical buildings. It had very little war damage because of the mayor and his part during the war. So, and it's got all three ethnic groups working together, living side by side. They don't have, out of control crime or brawls or anything like that. It's a pretty peaceful city.
Speaking of the ethnic groups, what is the problem in Bosnia?
What is the problem?
Why is there war?
They're crazy. I think they're crazy. Everybody thinks they're a victim. Thinks the other guys have taken advantage of them, and they're tired of it. They all think that. I don't want to get into a political discussion on that, but it's very sad.
Did you practice any medicine while you were there in an emergency situation?
No, I had no reason to.
Okay. What is your best memory of Bosnia?
We were able to put together a tour for the soldiers at the hospital that went to Medjugorje.
And where?
Medjugorje.
What years?
Medjugorje is a historical Christian site in southern Bosnia. It's south of Mostar, where apparitions of Virgin Mary have appeared since 1981. And there were a lot of Catholics at the hospital that had wanted to go, and I had really never heard anything about it. But a friend just accidentally sent me the book, I mean, we hadn't discussed it. She says, "Oh, I thought you might like to read this. It's over in your area. Maybe you can just buzz by." We're talking about 400 miles to get there and through 2 sectors. And the chaplain asked me about it too. I said, "No way. There's just no way. There's no way we can do that." So I read the book and I thought, is there a way? And, well, I mean, there was so much support for it from the CIMIC down in Sarajevo, the CIMIC down in Mostar, the colonel at the hospital, and eventually we were able to go. We took people from units all over Tuzla, and we ended up with 32 people, and General Miggs signed off on approval for that pass. We only got to spend, it's incredible, but it's true, we only got to spend 5 hours in Medjugorje because the trip was so long, and we billeted at night in Sarajevo. So we drove down, stayed in Sarajevo, got up early next morning, went down to Medjugorje, and had to be back by 11 o'clock at night when they closed the gates in Sarajevo. But those 5 hours, I mean, all of us, we got off the bus and we're like, "Do you believe it? We're here, we're really here." And it was just, and that area probably had the least war damage of any place I had been. It was so, and it was so clean, it was so pristine. Everybody came just to worship, and you had international visitors from all over the world. Germans, Italians, not all soldiers. You weren't seeing people going around. We didn't wear our uniform down there. That was probably one of my best memories. There were a lot of good memories, but that was probably my best.
And what's your worst memory?
My worst memory. I think just getting off that plane, with the airmen hollering at us, and we're all dressed like we're going to war, and I'm waiting to hear some artillery or something. It was this low fog. You couldn't see very far. You had no idea what the sense of urgency was, so you just responded as you were trained. That was probably my worst drilling.
If I say the word landmine, what's your reaction?
Probably sadness and anger. We treated 3 landmine patients in the hospital while I was there. There were local people that they were just medevac to us immediately. One gal and her mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law died. It makes you angry, because the people who are victims of landmines are not soldiers.
Who's the bad guy over there?
Who's the bad guy? I would say Milosevic.
Who's a good guy?
Hmm.
Or is there a good guy? Is there a bad guy?
Yeah, I think Milosevic's a bad guy. That's personal opinion.
What do you think?
Because from what I've read, and I've read his speeches too, but historically what I've read, and after reading the news, current news while I was there, and his speeches and stuff, when Tito died and left the country without a leader, everybody was vying for that leadership spot. Well, then the wall came down, and that changed the whole face of communism and USSR as we knew it. So now they still were mindset, we need a replacement for Tito, and he's got to be a strong dictatorial type leader. And Milosevic used a philosophy kind of like Hitler did. We Serbs are the superior race. You've been the victim your whole life. It's time to rise up and take charge of what is rightfully yours. And he keeps the pot stirred just enough, but he stays in the shadows where he's safe. Nobody's going to assassinate him or anything. Keeps it stirred up just enough, because it doesn't take much to take people who feel like they have nothing, and under communism they had very little, and make them think that it's everybody else's fault. It's the Muslims' fault, or it's the Croats' fault that we don't have anything, And so, and of course when you take, not all of them are uneducated, but they're rural people. They don't get a lot of education. The people I dealt with were mainly doctors, but out there, the peasants, you take an uneducated person and you stir them up emotionally, it's really hard for them to let go of that emotional rush, and so they keep driving on, and it makes absolutely no sense. Good guy, the whole UN group, you've got 22 countries wearing military uniforms helping to keep the peace. You've got 120 humanitarian agencies helping to try and repair and restore and rebuild and modernize. It's an incredible outpouring of love and care. And you drive down the street of Tuzla and you look at these people in the bus stop and on the street corners. It could be any town in America. They're the European descent, not a bunch of races or anything. European descent. They dress like Californians. They dress like Midwesterners. Some of them dress like Muslims, but it could happen here.
Is this war or conflict, whatever, is it ethnic, religious, or economic?
I don't think it's that simple. Could be, it's all, ethnic and religious are the same, and politics. Okay, those are the same. But they lost their leader. They were, without direction, and a strong leader arose, good, bad, or indifferent. They had somebody to follow. And just like Hitler, and also historically, when you get a strong leader that can stir up people to say everybody else is to blame why you're poor or this or that or the other thing, that fuels the fire of desire rather than learning to work together.
Do you ever fear for your life over there?
I was ultra cautious. It was a 3-woman team. We were a very soft target. We were out and around everywhere, the guys were. If I read the intel report and I had planned to go someplace and it said in the intel report, this is going on, don't send any extra convoys out there, and I'd call the local people, hey, I read this in the intel report, does that sound like something I should stay away from? And they said, well, I don't know, but probably. I would cancel a convoy, I'd plan something else, I'd go a different direction. I try to be cautious, but you never know if you're cautious enough. Nothing happened to us, thank God, so it must have been enough.
What was the reaction of the local people to you being a woman in the military?
Unfortunately, I didn't notice an unusual reaction. I know that they were glad that the U.S. military was there, gave them peace, time to rebuild a little bit. As far as me, a woman, a lot of the international humanitarian organizations had female leaders. A lot of the hospitals had female leaders.
So they just more or less looked on you as the American military?
Yeah.
Male or female?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Are we going to make a difference?
Given it enough time.
How long has this conflict been going on?
This one,
Well, in Bosnia.
well, Bosnia's had history of conflicts, just like Germany did too. Germany used to be a warring tribe all the way back historically. The restlessness that they have now because of a lack of a leader, and now, of course, they no longer are a single country of Yugoslavia, began, I think, in '89 when Slovenia seceded from Yugoslavia and Croatia wanted to go too. And there was an agreement with Milosevic, and I cannot remember the Croatian president, that they would just divide Bosnia down the middle because it's fertile farmland, and that's where that started. Historically, yeah, they fought a lot. Historically, it is the flashpoint for 2 world wars. I could see how that would be possible.
1914. August 15th?
I don't remember the exact
It was
date.
August 1914, so April.
And then for World War II, it wasn't until they came into Yugoslavia that we paid enough attention. You know, I mean, I can't remember the date it was, but I was reading that historically, when Germany or Italy invaded Yugoslavia, is when the rest of the world really got upset. They didn't care that much about Poland, you know, because they really weren't sure what was going on because of all the electromagnetic field that they couldn't get through. So they weren't sure something going on, you know. But when it happened to Yugoslavia, they paid attention.
Did you make a difference?
I had a commander a long time ago, you know, used to see me knock myself out trying to do stuff, and he says that you can make the difference in just one soldier's life, then you've really done something. In that case, yes, probably, in one soldier's life. As far as the people themselves, you know, we change out too much. These are people that are used to long-term relationships. They're not transitional types. You know, they've lived in the same house that their grandmother lived in and their great-grandmother. All I could do is initiate, and when the next guy comes in, he may have a different focus. When the guy comes in after that, may change his direction again. And so, but in some soldier's life, I believe that we made a difference.
What would you like to tell future generations about what you did in Boston? Your
Oh.
great-grandkids?
Well, I did the best I could, trying to help repair a broken medical system, healthcare system. But probably the biggest thing is I grew a lot. I think that's why I was there, for myself, which I didn't know.
I was going to ask you, did you come back a different person?
Yes, very much.
How,
Very much.
if I may ask.
Well, what I will talk about is I do have a better appreciation for the lifestyle in America. You know, if we're sick and broke, we can still get medical care. But they can't over there.
Can I butt in for just a second, or do I need to?
Sure. Oh.
I always talk a lot. You didn't want something short and to the point, did you?
No.
So, you say that you are a changed person,
Yes,
and
I think it's for the better.
yeah,
Mhm.
and you, I think you were talking how your attitude toward this country has it changed?
Well, you know, I just feel blessed to have been born in America. To be here at this time in the history of the world, with all the opportunities that are available to me, the technology that's here. We have the greatest armed forces in the world. We probably have the best medical in the world. And I really don't have any limits. My soldier, one of my translators is 34 and, you know, finished medical school, and it's not very, I mean, being a doctor is a noble job over there. It's not a lucrative job. And I said, well, why don't you go back to school? I mean, he's a fantastic historian. He could be a lawyer. He's got just tremendous, very articulate, tremendous background knowledge, skills. And he says, I'm too old. And I said, I am in school. I said, don't tell me I'm ever going to be too old to go to school. So, but that is the attitude over there, and I'm sure it is in a lot of the European countries, though I never noticed it, because to me, I can go to school There was an article in the paper that in the Stars and Stripes I cut out and gave to them. A 94-year-old man had just finished his bachelor's degree. 94. And I said, here, put this on your wall. Don't you ever think you're limited. But over there, they really are. They really are. They're restricted. They don't have freedom of movement. Getting out of the country to go someplace else is very difficult right now. That's what part of the Dayton Peace Accords and our presence is trying to heal. But it just takes time.
So, any comments you want to make on anything?
I think we need to stay there. And when I say that, how long would it take? Took us, almost 50 years in Germany, and we're still in Germany. Because Germany was a very aggressive, historically aggressive tribe. And I feel the same way about Bosnia and former Yugoslavia, that the international community needs to stay there if they really want them to be democratic, because 50 years of communism and 5 years of war and 2 years of a tenuous peace is not going to make them democratic. They need the role models. We know, we've reaped the benefits of democracy. And we spent years combating communism, so to speak, in the Cold War, and it's fallen. Do we abandon those children that have lost to, that now communism was the only thing they knew and they don't know anything else? It takes time to train them, to teach them, and to be role models for them. And that's our moral obligation. We put a lot of money into fighting the Cold War. We need to put a lot of time into nurturing democracy. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.